Hello and welcome to Unspun Live, the Herald political podcast keeping you up to date with everything going on in Holyrood. I'm Rebecca McCurdy and I'm joined by my colleague Hannah Brown, political correspondent.
Hello.
Hannah, we've got a big week coming up in Holyrood, but before we get on to that, you sat down with Roz Foyer at the Scottish Trade Union Conference. It was quite a mouthful, but how was it?
Yeah, really interesting. She opened up about quite a lot of things. You know, we spoke about child poverty. Obviously, you led on that series last week. She spoke about that, and she also kind of brought up the Supreme Court ruling as well. Quite an interesting and new take from Ms. Foyer on that. Other things that we discussed was what she wanted to see both Scottish and UK governments focusing on in the year ahead. So yeah, loads to discuss.
Yeah, and there is a programme for government this week. It's been brought forward quite a bit early. We're going to get into all the kind of meaty details of that, but before we do, it's also John Swinney's first year as First Minister, his anniversary. He's not really got much time for reflection if you think about it, because he has this, like we say, massive legislative agenda, and it kind of kickstarts a year until Holyrood 2026. We're officially going to be in full-blown campaign era. How do you assess John Swinney's year in government? Because when you think about it, he came in at a really difficult time. It was seen that his party was really fractured. A couple of weeks into the job, a general election was called. Pretty disastrous result. They only got 9 MPs down from 48. What do you think? Has he managed to steady the ship?
Well, that's always been the assertion of him, right? He's the steady hands John. He has been, and he has been a safe pair of hands for the SNP. I think he has brought the party together. He's managed to take Kate Forbes from the backbenches, make her his deputy first minister, and yeah, brought more people together. I think though now he is coming across quite a lot of difficulties, especially after all that we've seen around the Supreme Court judgment fallout, and also, you know, ahead of this programme for government, we've also seen him drop quite a lot of bills, or his government drop quite a lot of bills, primarily that misogyny bill. You know, the Scottish government are no longer bringing those plans forward because they say that the Supreme Court ruling has impacted that and it gives them insufficient time to bring forward the plans. Not so sure about that. Yeah, very, very odd, because we already knew that the misogyny bill was coming across quite difficult issues already. It was becoming quite a bloated bill. There was potentially going to be 5 different points of offences that would potentially be made as a result of it around misogyny, creating misogyny.
I think if you think back to the hate crime legislation as well, women kind of complained around that time that they weren't included in that, and the justification for it was, there's a separate bill coming, there's this misogyny bill coming, now it's not, and the Scottish Government kind of has to roll back on that and potentially reform the hate crime bill as well.
Well, now we know that instead of having this misogyny bill, they will add the protected characteristic of sex to the Hate Crime Act of 2021. Now, this is a suggestion that they completely didn't want to put in place in the first place. They brought this bill forward for the purposes that it wouldn't fit into the Hate Crime Act, so it just feels like they're rolling back, and it's not a good look. There's also the fact that they've brought, or they've dropped, or at least held off on the conversion therapy bill. That's been dropped, but it will be in the SNP's manifesto for next year. It kind of depends what happens with conversations with the UK government for a bill covering England and Wales and Scotland on this as well. But they said, you know, if this bill doesn't go through properly, or we're not happy with the UK government's bill, then we'll bring forward a pledge in our manifesto. But yet again, delays, pushbacks, and doesn't look particularly healthy or strong from the SNP ahead of this programme for government.
Yeah, I think you're right about the Supreme Court being one of the kind of thorns in the side of John Swinney and the SNP in the year ahead, and that's why I don't think that this year, his reflections on the year in office is necessarily going to be something that he's going to want to reflect on too much. I think there's too many challenges still there that they have to kind of address, and I think that this whole sex versus gender is just not going away for them. I think that brings us on to the programme for government. Huge legislative agenda. John Swinney's going to set out his plans for the year ahead. He's brought it forward early, saying that it will give him time to kind of take action. But crucially though, he's also said that it's kind of been brought forward early because of the kind of rise of the right, because of Donald Trump's tariffs. We're expecting, I think there would be no surprises if the NHS didn't come up, if the NHS did come up rather, you know, things like big business might be supported, upskilling business, we know the CBI asked for kind of a package or a plan to kind of develop skills. Is there anything else that we can kind of expect?
Yeah, I just want to kind of throw us back as well to this threat of the right. I think it's important that we mention that the Runcorn and Halesbury by-election from last week, obviously an English by-election, but one which was a landmark one for Reform getting their first female MP, and I think sets the tone for what potentially we'll see in Scotland. I mean, we had Thomas Kerr calling the results absolutely historic, and he did say, I've got the quote here, that it gives us the momentum that we need for the Hamilton by-election in just 5 weeks' time to make political history in Scotland as well. So clearly a threat there, maybe not so much for the SNP. You know, the Tories have branded Reform of a gift to the SNP because it allows, it's not eating into their votes, or this party isn't eating into their votes, it's eating into Labour and the Tories vote primarily, but still nonetheless, if you are arguing against tackling the right and you know, seeing this party gain momentum down south that may be transferred up here, still a worry. Turning back to the programme for government, what we can expect, mentioned NHS will definitely come up. It's been a bit of a bee in his bonnet for quite some time now on delivery. You know, when Swinney first came into power, waiting lists and the amount of people on waiting lists was quite substantial. I think it was around the 600,000 mark. Now it's going around the mark of 850,000. So we see that rise, and it feels for the general public that, you know, this is a huge issue for them. What's their government doing to tackle it? If you're looking at waiting lists and times alone on that, you might not feel like enough is happening. You mentioned, you know, he said ahead of this, I think today when we're recording on Monday, he said he wants to accelerate action for business. You know, you mentioned the CBI have called for a skills agenda to help people upskill, new training. He said today, you know, his action tomorrow will focus on supporting businesses during a turbulent time and help make Scotland a more prosperous country. It's not surprising that he's mentioned business, because one of his key aims in government, he set out his 4 key aims. One of those was growing the economy, others improving public services, eradicating child poverty and tackling climate change. So we can see these 4 key issues. I think we can happily or safely expect those 4 key issues to play a huge part in his programme for government tomorrow. Yeah.
Your interview with Roz Foyer last week kind of centred around this idea of what Scotland needs to happen, and she also had some asks for the UK government, I think, as well. What were some of her concerns?
Yeah, so we obviously heard this time, but she did mention, you know, her main goal during this interview was to set out what action she wants the UK and Scottish governments to take in this year. And one of them for Scotland, social care, pay increase, maybe one for England, you know, energy bills cut. You know, these seemed like her main messages. Basically, what is impacting ordinary people right now? Their energy bills are sky high. They're seeing council tax rocket up in quite a lot of local authorities here in Scotland. We're not seeing people who are working in the social care sector, in her eyes, being paid enough. All primary issues and primary issues primarily for trade unions and the Trade Union Congress to focus on. So her message at this Congress on Monday last week was, okay, you've set out some of your aims, Swinney, we've seen that you want to improve the economy, but how are you going to act now? And that's their focus. They want to see more action from both governments. Mm. She also raised the issue off the back of your child poverty series of dropping the two-child benefit cap for the UK. Now, we know that the Scottish Government have plans to mitigate that policy next year, but she's saying if this was dropped, it would allow the Scottish Government to put in more resources on other areas to improve child poverty. So, big asks there. She said that if we didn't see a drop in the two-child benefit cap, that would cause an explosion of child poverty across Scotland. So, very much focused on how to improve lives for working class people, and also how to improve and eradicate child poverty, one of the main asks from the trade union, and also, really, really crucially, one of the promises that John Swinney has led on for his time in government.
Yep. So we're going to play the interview. I think crucially there's also some good chat about the Supreme Court judgment that our listeners should look out for. But we'll move on to that interview.
Roz Foyer, thank you so much for joining us on Unspun Live, the Herald's politics podcast. We are here at the STUC Congress. First day, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling very good about it. I've just been watching our first and one of our most important debates taking place around how our movement unites and stands up to the far-right politics that are permeating our country. And I can see a very united, very diverse and very active Congress shaping up for this week.
You were met with applause when talking about this, or the Congress was met with applause when they brought up the issue of tackling the far right. Why did you decide to focus on this theme?
Well, quite honestly, the amount of motions that we received from our various affiliates raising concerns about this was enough of an alarm bell for us. But we've seen a really worrying rise in far-right ideologies, politics in general, mainstream politics sliding to the right, our media printing more right-wing rhetoric, and we really think that the trade union movement is well placed to counter this. We do not need to see the lies and the negativity and the scapegoating of punching down on the most vulnerable in our community. We know that society has some big challenges and working class people have some big challenges, but we need to make sure that we're actually demanding better from our governments, not scapegoating our most vulnerable groups.
Someone who welcomed delegates this morning was Unison's Wilma Brown. Now, she was accused of liking racist and Islamophobic social media posts. Do you think this is an appropriate start to a Congress which is talking about tackling the far right?
Well, this was someone who gave the supporting vote of thanks to the President. Wilma made some mistakes when she was a candidate for the Labour Party in terms of some of her social media and some of the posts that she inadvertently forwarded. It's been fully investigated, she's fully apologised, and anyone that knows Wilma Brown knows that she's got a track record of fighting against racism in our community and supporting some of the most vulnerable people in our community. So, that's the President's prerogative, who they invite to be their vote of thanks. And at the end of the day, we have to be a movement that's not ostracising or alienating people. Many of our members may well be tempted to vote for parties like Reform at the moment, but it's not because they're racist, it's because they're seeking answers. And, we actually have to be an inclusive movement and willing to forgive when people are atoning for things they've done, and I fully think that was a mistake.
And just turning back to Wilma Brown specifically, I mean, this only happened a year or so ago. She was suspended as a result as a Labour candidate. The optics of this surely looks bad. She's just introducing
Yeah, but my understanding is she's been fully investigated and exonerated of any wrongdoing by her union, and it's her president's, it's the president, it's their prerogative who they invite to do their vote of thanks. No, I'm fully supportive of the president's decision to invite Wilma Brown to do that vote of thanks. And as I said, I think we have to be a forgiving movement when our members make mistakes or inadvertently, and it actually goes to the nub of the issue. You know, some of the messaging on the front of some of these things doesn't at first appear racist, but we know that the far right are very clever at tapping into people's issues, tapping into where they feel disaffected or upset or exploited. And you know, it's actually very easy to end up in social media, etc., going down a rabbit hole. So you know, I don't know the specific details of the case, but what I do know is that this is an activist who our president felt was appropriate to give her vote of thanks, and I stand by our president in their decision.
You painted quite a dark vision of the future to the Herald's Neil Mackay ahead of this Congress, saying Scotland needs a wake-up call as we are heading towards, as you put it, a dystopian future. Why do you think that is, and where does the blame lie? Does it lie in the current Scottish and UK government's doors?
I think they have to shoulder a lot of the blame for where we're at as a society. I think centrist political parties like the Labour Party, like the SNP, have been making a lot of promises. They talk the talk of social justice, equality, and about redistribution of wealth and making working people's lives better. But what we're seeing on the ground is that working people's lives are not getting materially better fast enough. And you know, we've had decades of austerity from the Tory government. We've had our public services wrecked. We've had workers' rights wrecked. And we need to see our government stepping up and actually delivering for working people. And you can't have, you know, Scandinavian-style public services on American-style levels of taxation. You actually have to have a debate about how do we redistribute wealth in our society. That means our politicians taking on the billionaire class, looking at how we get some of that extreme wealth in our economy and spread it throughout our society to make sure that people can afford, you know, that we don't need working people going to food banks, that people can afford to pay their bills, and that their pay keeps up with the cost of living. That's not happening, and that is a total political failure on behalf of our governments. It must change.
Can you pinpoint to any specific policies that have come in place recently which are potentially perpetuating issues for working class people?
Yes, well, I think that the two child cap and benefits is something that is deeply of regret. You know, that was something that was brought in by the Tory government. I would have expected that to be lifted by an incoming Labour government, and I think it's really quite shocking that we've not seen that happen, and that will cause, you know, an explosion, I believe, in child poverty because it needs to be urgently lifted. We're also seeing, you know, our energy bills rising once again, and in some ways it was ironic to see, you know, we got a minimum wage, which was welcome, a minimum wage hike from the UK government. It was pretty much wiped out by the council tax rises we've seen and the energy bill rises that we saw coming in on the 1st of April also. So we need, at UK level, to have a serious discussion about bringing our energy into public ownership and tackling now the unaffordable energy bills that people are having to pay. It's just not appropriate that we allow the free market to set these levels. Government should be intervening and taking control of our energy systems. And similarly, you know, the Scottish Government need to take action on our council tax. It is unaffordable, it is a regressive tax, it disproportionately impacts on low-paid working people, and we need to see action taken to completely review that whole system and replace it.
Just turning back to the two-child benefit cap, you mentioned how detrimental it is to people. Do you think it's also a barrier to the Scottish Government meeting their own targets on child poverty?
Yes, I think it is, and you know, ultimately the Scottish Government does have the ability to mitigate it, but you know, they also need to have the budget to mitigate it, and you know, partly that relies on the UK government upping their spending on things like welfare, on public spending to get the money coming through to the Scottish budget. But the Scottish government also has a responsibility. They, according to our figures, could be inputting about 3.7 billion more resources into the budget through progressive taxation that they have the power to deliver. So, you know, they still have powers that would enable them to inject more money into their budget should they take the political decisions to do so. So, yes, you know, that it will have to be addressed, and if it's not been addressed by the UK government, then the Scottish government absolutely should do that. But they're possibly going to have to look at, you know, how they get more money coming in.
Does the STUC have any specific measures that they would like to see from the Scottish, UK governments? What they could take, any measures that they could take to improve children's lives in Scotland?
Yes, I think that we have to look to pay levels. Workers are still playing wage catch-up, basically, after the cost of living crisis. Inflation may have gone down, but we haven't properly caught up with the alarming rises in household bills, in food and in other essentials, and that needs to be addressed. And you know, the governments at both levels have responsibility to push that forward. As I mentioned, we need to be dealing with putting a cap on fuel bills and making sure that that happens sooner rather than later. We also should be looking at taking some interventionary measures to key groups of workers. We're going to be having a session tomorrow around social care and care workers. Social care is in crisis, and we need to make sure that we are paying care workers at least £15 an hour and doing it right now, and also implementing proper collective bargaining for those workers going forward right across the care sector, whether they be public, private or in the voluntary sector. And you know, there are many other policies that could make a difference for people. We need an injection of cash to help rebuild our public services. Our local authorities are in complete crisis, and when you look at the services that local authorities deliver, these are services that working class people rely on. Our hospital waiting lists are, you know, miles long. We haven't recovered properly yet from the COVID pandemic, and that will require resources, it will require workers being put in there, and ultimately, you know, the right choices need to be made to start delivering on these things.
Trade unions have historically been known for their strong relationship with the Labour Party. Do you think this relationship has deteriorated, and if so, who takes the place now as a party for the workers?
So the Labour Party has a long relationship with the trade union movement, and there are many affiliates to the STUC who also affiliate to the Labour Party. One of the things that is actually welcome that the Labour government that's just come in is delivering is the New Deal for Workers, and you know, the theme of our conference is about how we build on that New Deal. So, you know, I think it's all relative. There are a lot of things the Labour government has not delivered on that are causing us real concern, and I think in these times where we see the rise of far-right politics, we need a Labour government that's fully on the side of working people, and they've got a long way to go to prove that. But I do want to give credit where credit's due. The package of workers' rights that Labour will be bringing back in will fundamentally change the employment market and the labour market for the better, and will allow trade unions to organise workers once again and to really ensure that workers get that package of rights and can also bargain collectively for better pay, better conditions. So it will change the balance of power in our economy in favour of ordinary working people, and that is a fundamental shift, but it's not enough. We need the rich and the super rich in particular to be taxed more. We need to see budgets that when cuts are being made, the reaction is not to punch down or cut our welfare benefit system. We actually need to see more investment in public services, and we need to see more investment in welfare and supporting those who need it most.
So it's not a shift from Labour to the SNP for the STUC. Who do you have the closest affiliation with, do you think?
I think in Scotland it's clear our members vote for many different parties, but for me, being the head of the STUC, there are three parties that we probably would work quite closely with in the Scottish Parliament, and that would be Labour, it would be the SNP, and it would be the Green Party, because these are all parties that value trade unions as important social partners, and they're all parties that we can have a conversation with and seek to influence in terms of how we can get the best deal for workers. And the STUC will continue to deal with all three of those parties without fear or favour. And there are things we agree with that they do, there are things we don't agree with that they do. We will always want more from all of them, but I think in particular, we've got a Labour government that's come in, a matter of months ago, that we want to see delivering more for our people and doing it fast. We've got an SNP government that's been in power for 18 years, and we don't believe they're delivering some of the rhetoric that they've liked to talk about. So my message to both governments, regardless of whether it's SNP here in Scotland or Labour at UK level, is pull your socks up, because you don't have, you're in the last chance saloon of public opinion here. The right are making gains, and it's no surprise that they are, given the economic circumstances that too many people are living in. It's not good enough. So let's see some real delivery.
Just finally, looking at the Supreme Court ruling, you said in a recent interview, I'm not sure the law has got it right. What do you mean by this? And are you saying that the judges from the UK's highest court are getting it wrong in terms of single-sex spaces?
What I'm saying is I'm not sure that the decision that was made has got it right or thought about all of the implications on the ground in our public institutions, etc. At the end of the day, the law is the law, and the machinery of the law has done its job and come to a position, and it wouldn't be the first time a trade unionist has sat and said, well, they don't think that's the best law, and maybe we need to rethink things. We campaign against laws all the time, so I don't think that's such a big deal to question the law or say that it should be improved. But on this particular issue, if you actually look at it from the point of view as trade unions are and consider the implications of the decision, we need to make sure that all people's rights are balanced and that women's rights are protected, absolutely, but we also need to make sure that trans people's rights are protected. And I would want us to be part of a society where, we legitimately understand their right to exist, and that means making space for them in our spaces and in our society. And I'm not clear on how the implications of this judgment is going to enable us to do that yet. We've seen some guidance come out from the HRC. It's not clear to me, that what are we expecting trans men and women to do? Are we expecting trans men to use women's facilities and trans women to use men's facilities? Or have we to build separate facilities for this group everywhere? And what does that say about our inclusion of this group as a society and about not making them feel other or different? So I think we've got a long way to go to work out the repercussions of this legal ruling.
Do you foresee having to take action as a trade union congress as a result, and what could this look like? Well,
we will see what our congress says. I'm sure there will be a debate this week around that matter. We've got emergency motions closing later today. We'll see what Congress says about what sort of action the STUC should or shouldn't be taking, but on the ground, our trade union affiliates will be working through the repercussions of this just now and how that they can protect all their members and balance those members' needs. So there's a lot of detailed work to be done. What it definitely requires is cool heads. We're not interested in a debate that's about name calling. There has been far too much toxicity in this debate, I believe, and we need to be clear that we're about protecting all workers and all workers' rights.
So action from the STUC isn't off the table when it comes to this ruling?
Well, nothing's off the table when it comes to action from the STUC on any issue.
And just finally, Roz Foyer, do you condemn the words of Maggie Chapman when she said there was bigotry, prejudice and hatred coming from the Supreme Court?
I don't condemn the words of Maggie Chapman. I don't think that necessarily I would utter those words, and that's all I would have to say on that.
Roz Foyer, thank you very much for joining us on Unspun Live, the Herald's Politics podcast.
So that's all we've got time for. Thanks very much for listening or watching wherever you get your podcasts. Keep an eye on heraldscotland.com this week. We'll be covering the programme for government in depth.